Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. The moon hung high over Teldrassil, casting an ethereal glow over the branches of the world tree. From her vantage point in the temple, Diana watched the silvery light filter through the leaves, its radiance bathing the forest floor far below. As the high priestess of the night elves, she was used to seeking comfort in the serenity of the night and the gentle embrace of Allure, the goddess she had sworn her life to serve, but tonight, no such peace found her. Diana sighed and fingers brushed the pendant at her neck, a simple crescent moon, Allure symbol. Her faith had never faltered, not in all the years she had fought for her people. Yet something dark gnawed at the edges of her mind. Dreams, no, nightmares had plagued her for weeks. Visions of shadows, deep and all-encompassing, creeping into her heart, turning her away from the light. She had told no one of these dreams, not even Tyranne, her friend and leader. Tyranne had always been a pillar of strength for their people, her will unbreakable. How could Diana admit her own doubts to someone like her? She feared what Tyranne might say, what the others might think. After all, a priestess was meant to be above such fears, but the truth remained. Diana could not shake the feeling that darkness lay in her future, that the shadows she had been seeing in her dreams were more than mere figments of her imagination. A knock at her door broke her from her thoughts. Diana straightened, pulling the hood of her cloak up to hide her troubled expression. "Enter," she called, her voice as steady as she could make it. Tyranne strode into the room, her emerald eyes sharp with urgency. "Diana, we have received news. Morel has returned." The name sent a shiver down Diana's spine. Morel had once been one of them, a night elf priest like her. But he had turned his back on Allure, seeking forbidden knowledge in the depths of the dark moonshade, the cursed realm that lay beyond their border. When he had returned years ago, his heart had been consumed by shadow, and he had led an army of twisted creatures in a devastating war against their people. They had thought him vanquished, but now it seemed the shadow had risen again. "Are you certain?" Diana asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Tyranne nodded grimly. "Scouts have seen his forces gathering near the borders of Teldrassil. We don't have much time. He seeks to destroy us." Diana closed her eyes for a moment, letting the weight of the situation sink in. The nightmares, the shadows, it was all connected. "I will go," she said, her resolve hardening. "I will face her." Tyranne frowned, stepping closer. "Diana, you are the high priestess. Your place is here with the people, guiding them in their faith." "My place is where I am needed most," Diana replied, "and right now that is with you on the front line. If Morel is leading this attack, we must stop him before he can set foot in Teldrassil." Tyranne studied her for a moment, her eyes searching Diana's face. Then she nodded. "Very well, but know this. The Dark Moonshade is no ordinary battlefield. Its shadows corrupt all they touch. You must stay vigilant, Diana. The darkness there is strong, and it has already claimed Morel." Diana's heart clenched at the warning, but she pushed her fears aside. "I understand. I will not falter." That night, Diana prepared herself for the journey into the Dark Moonshade. She donned her armor, the silver of the Allure symbol gleaming on her chest plate, and gathered her staff, the weapon that had served her faithfully through countless battles. But as she strapped the last piece of armor in place, she caught a glimpse of herself in the mirror. Her reflection seemed different, darker, as though the shadows around her had grown bolder. She stared at the reflection for a moment, her heart pounding. Was it her imagination, or were the shadows truly creeping closer? Shaking her head, she turned away from the mirror and left her chambers. The time for doubt had passed. At dawn, she met Tyranne and the others at the edge of the forest. A small contingent of elite warriors stood ready to march, their expressions grim. Tyranne was already in her battle gear, her twin glaives strapped to her back, her face set in determination. But when she saw Diana approach, a flicker of concern passed over her features. "Are you ready?" Tyranne asked, her voice low. Diana nodded, though the weight of the pendant at her neck felt heavier than usual, as ready as I'll ever be. Without another word, they set off into the woods, the dense trees of Teldrassil gradually giving way to the darker, more twisted growth of the Dark Moonshade. The deeper they ventured, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. The air grew thick with a sense of unease, the light of the sun barely penetrating the thick canopy overhead. As they neared the heart of the Dark Moonshade, the first signs of Morel's corruption began to appear. The trees, once tall and majestic, were now twisted and gnarled, their bark blackened and brittle. Strange, shadowy creatures lurked in the underbrush, their eyes glowing with malevolent intent. Diana could feel the darkness pressing in around her, whispering to her, calling her name. "Stay close," Tyrannel warned, her voice tense. "The shadows are treacherous here." Diana nodded, gripping her staff tighter, but the further they went, the more difficult it became to ignore the pull of the darkness. It whispered to her in her own voice, tempting her with promises of power, of freedom from her doubts and fears. All she had to do was let go to embrace the shadows and wield them as Morale had. "No," she muttered under her breath, shaking her head. "I am a servant of the loon. I will not give it." But the whispers persisted, growing louder with each step. Suddenly, a figure stepped out from the shadows ahead of them, his face hidden beneath a hood. Diana's heart skipped a beat as she recognized the twisted form of Morale, his once handsome features now marred by darkness. His eyes gleamed with a sickly yellow light, and his lips curled into a mocking smile. "Ah, Diana," he said, his voice dripping with malice. "I was wondering when you would arrive. I've been waiting for you." Tyrannel stepped forward, her glaives drawn. "We will stop you, Morale. Your darkness has no place here." Morale chuckled darkly, his gaze shifting to Diana. "Oh, but that's where you were wrong. Tyrannel, the darkness has always been here. It sensed in all of us, even in your precious high priestess." Diana felt her stomach churn as his words hit home. The shadows around her seemed to pulse with energy, and for a moment she felt herself swaying toward them, tempted by their offer of power. Morale noticed her hesitation and smiled. "You feel it, don't you, Diana? The darkness inside you calling to you? You can't deny it forever." "I am not like you," Diana said, her voice shaking slightly. "I will never fall to the shadow." Morale's smile widened. "We shall see." With a wave of his hand, the shadows around him surged forward, forming into twisted creatures that lunged at the group. Diana and Tyrannel fought side by side, their weapons flashing in the dim light as they cut down the shadowy beast. But for every creature they felled, more seemed to take their place. Diana's heart raced as she fought, the darkness pressing in around her, clouding her mind. The whispers were louder now, almost deafening. She could feel her strength waning, her connection to a loon slipping away. "Diana, stay with me," Tyrannel shouted, her voice cutting through the fog, and Diana smiled. But it was too late. The shadows surged forward, wrapping around Diana like a cloak, pulling her into their embrace. For a moment, everything went black. When she opened her eyes, she was no longer in the dark moonshade. She stood in a strange shadowy realm, the air thick with darkness. Morale stood before her, his eyes gleaming with triumph. "Welcome to the truth, Diana," he said, spreading his arms wide. "This is your destiny. The shadows are a part of you, just as they are a part of me." Diana shook her head, backing away. "No, this can't be real." "But it is," Morale said, stepping closer. "You've felt it all along, haven't you? The doubt, the fear, the darkness inside you. You've spent your entire life trying to deny it. But deep down, you know it. So who you truly are." Tears welled up in Diana's eyes as his words echoed in her mind. She had always known there was a darkness inside her, a part of her that she had tried to suppress. But now, standing here in the heart of the shadows, she could feel it as real and tangible as the air she breathed. Morale smiled cruelly. "Accept it. Diana, embrace the darkness, and you will become more powerful than you ever imagined. Together, we can rule the shadows and bring an end to the tyranny of the light." For a moment, Diana was tempted. The darkness felt so familiar, so comforting. It whispered promises of power, of freedom from her doubts and fears. She could feel it wrapping around her like a warm blanket, urging her to let go. But then she remembered Tyrannel's words, the warnings she had given her before they had entered the dark moonshade. She remembered the faith she had held in a loon, the light that had guided her through countless battles. "No," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Morale frowned, his eyes narrowing. "What did you say?" "I said no," Diana repeated, her voice growing stronger. "I will not fall to the darkness. I am a servant of a loon, and I will fight for the light." With those words, Diana felt a surge of energy course through her. The shadows that had wrapped around her began to dissolve, replaced by a brilliant light that emanated from deep within her. Morale stepped back, his expression twisted with rage. "You fool, you could have had everything." "I already have everything I need," Diana said, raising her staff. With a cry of defiance, she unleashed a wave of light that swept across the shadowy realm, banishing the darkness and shattering the illusions that had held her captive. When she opened her eyes again, she was back in the dark moonshade, Tyrande standing over her, her face etched with concern. "Diana, are you all right?" Diana blinked, disoriented as the familiar surroundings of the dark moonshade came back into focus. Her limbs felt heavy, but the oppressive weight of the darkness was gone. She looked up at Tyrande, who was kneeling beside her, a rare look of relief crossing her usually stern features. "I'm fine," Diana said of worse, but she sat up, rubbing her temples as the lingering effects of the shadow realm slowly dissipated. "Tilly, Marat." Tyrande shook her head. "He escaped, but his forces have retreated for now. You are gone." "Diana, the shadows took you to—" Diana took a deep breath, steadying herself. "I know, but I found my way back." She met Tyrande's gaze, a newfound clarity in her eyes. "Our morale was right about one thing, though. The shadows are a part of me. They always have been." Tyrande frowned, but Diana raised a hand to stop her. "It's not what you think. I fought it, the temptation to fall into darkness, but I realized something. It's not about denying the shadows. It's about embracing both the light and the dark. Only then can I truly be whole." Tyrande's frown deepened, but there was no judgment in her gaze, only understanding. "Try, and what will you do now?" Diana stood, her legs shaky, but her resolve unshakable. "Hero, we need to finish this. Morale is still out there, and as long as the dark moonshade exists, he'll never stop trying to destroy us." Tyrande nodded, rising to her feet, "and we go after him together." The two of them gathered the remaining warriors, their numbers smaller, now after the brutal battle with Morale's forces. The shadow creatures had left their mark, but the night elves were resilient. They pressed on deeper into the heart of the dark moonshade, where Morale's presence still lingered like a festering wound. As they moved through the darkened forest, Diana could feel the pull of the shadows again, but it no longer filled her with fear. Instead, she found a strange sense of calm in the balance she had discovered within herself. The whispers were still there, but now they felt more like a part of her rather than an external force trying to drag her under. The ground beneath them became uneven, twisted roots snaking across their path, as if the very force was trying to stop them. Strange, unnatural sounds echoed in the distance, creatures of shadow, watching, waiting. Ahead, a clearing opened up, and there at the center stood Marat. He was alone now, his once commanding presence diminished. The darkness that had once flowed from him, like a tidal wave, was now barely a whisper, but his eyes still burned with fury. "You think you've won, don't you?" How he spat, his voice dripping with venom. "You think that just because you've accepted your precious balance, you can defeat me?" Diana stepped forward, her staff glowing with the soft light of a lute. "This isn't talking about winning, Morale. It's time about ending this once and for all." Morale sneered. "You're still blind, Diana. You think you can have both the light and the dark, but you were wrong. You'll never be free of it. It will consume you just as it consumed me." Diana shook her head, her gaze steady. "Morale, it consumed you because you let it. But I've learned that the darkness doesn't have to be my enemy. It's some part of who I am, but it doesn't try to control me." Morale's eyes flickered with something, fear perhaps, or recognition. He raised his hand, summoning the last of his power, the shadows swirling around him in one final desperate attack. But this time, Diana was ready. She raised her staff, and the light of a loon flared. But instead of pushing the darkness away, she allowed it to mingle with the shadows. Light and dark swirled together, creating a perfect harmony that pulsed with a power greater than anything Morale could conjure. With a shout, Diana released the energy, and it surged toward Morale, engulfing him completely. For a moment, there was silence. Then the darkness began to dissolve, the twisted shadows that had corrupted the forest fading into nothingness. The oppressive weight that had hung over the dark moonshade lifted, and the forest began to breathe again. Morale was gone. Diana lowered her staff, her shoulders slumping with exhaustion. The battle was over, but the toll it had taken on her was immense. She could feel the weight of everything the shadows she had faced, the inner struggle she had endured, settling over her like a heavy cloak. Tyrande stepped up beside her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Frigate, stunned," she said softly. Diana nodded, though. She knew the journey was far from over. "The dark moonshade will heal now," she said, glancing around at the forest, which was already beginning to return to its natural state. "But we can truly forget what happened here. We can to let it happen again." Tyrande's expression was solemn. "You did what needed to be done, Diana. You faced the darkness, both within and without, and you came out stronger for it. Diana smiled, though it was tinged with sadness. I suppose I did, but it doesn't feel like a victory. Not really. Tyrannade squeezed her shoulder. That's because it wasn't just a battle against an enemy. It was a battle for yourself, and those are never easy. Diana let out a soft breath, feeling the truth of Tyrannade word. She had fought more than just morale today. She had fought her own fears, her own doubts, and the darkness she had tried to deny for so long. And in doing so, she had found something she never thought she would, peace. Together they turned and made their way back through the forest, the remaining warriors following in silence. As they walked, Diana couldn't help but feel a sense of closure. The shadows were still there, lurking at the edges of her mind, but they no longer frightened her. She had faced them, accepted them, and now they were just another part of her. When they finally reached the borders of Teldrassil, the first light of dawn was beginning to break over the horizon, casting the towering branches of the world tree in a warm golden glow. The sight filled Diana with a quiet sense of hope. The darkness had not won. It never would. As they approached the gates, the sentinels greeted them with a mixture of relief and reverence. News of the victory had already spread, and the night elves bowed their heads in respect as Diana and Tyrannade passed. But Diana felt no need for celebration. This victory was a quiet one, personal and profound. She had not only saved her people from Moralla's wrath, but had also found a way to save herself from the shadows she had feared for so long. As she made her way back to the temple, Diana paused, glancing up at the sky. The moon was still visible faint against the growing light of the sun, and for the first time in a long while, Diana smiled. She was no longer just a servant of Elune. She was a master of her own destiny, light and dark in perfect balance.